It was the winter of 1941, and the world was watching the most brutal conflict in human history unfold across the frozen plains of Russia. When the first Lend-Lease observers and Western military attachés arrived in Moscow, they were shown the latest pride of the Soviet Red Army, the PPSH-41. To the eyes of an American officer, accustomed to the polished steel and fine walnut of the M1 Garand, or the sophisticated engineering of the Thompson submachine gun, the Soviet weapon looked like a joke. It was crude. It was ugly. It was made of cheap stamped metal and rough wood that looked like it had been carved with a dull axe in a village barn. Some American observers reportedly mocked it, calling it a peasant's toy or a sewing machine. They laughed at the oversized drum magazine and the jacketed barrel that looked like a piece of industrial plumbing. They couldn't imagine how this clunky, rattling object could compete with the precision instruments of modern warfare. But their laughter would soon turn into a haunting silence. Because while the Western world was obsessed with craftsmanship, the Soviet Union was focused on one thing: survival through sheer, overwhelming volume of fire. The story of the PPSH-41 didn't begin in a high-tech lab, but in the bitter lessons of defeat. During the Winter War against Finland, Soviet troops had been decimated by Finnish ski patrols armed with the Suomi KP-31 submachine gun. The Soviets realized they had a massive hole in their doctrine. They needed a weapon that could be produced by the millions, in factories staffed by teenagers and elderly women, and it had to work in 60 degrees below zero when every other gun jammed. Enter Georgy Shpagin. He was a man who understood that in a total war, perfect is the enemy of finished. Shpagin designed a weapon that used stamping technology, which was revolutionary for the time. Instead of hours of complex machining, the PPSH-41's receiver could be punched out of a flat sheet of steel like a car fender. It was a masterpiece of brutalist engineering, but the real shock for the Western observers came when they saw the weapon in action. The PPSH-41 didn't just fire bullets, it deleted anything in front of it. With a staggering rate of fire of over 900 rounds per minute, it earned the nickname the burp gun. In the cramped, terrifying corridors of urban combat in places like Stalingrad, the crude Soviet rifle was suddenly the most desirable object on Earth. American soldiers who later encountered the weapon through intelligence reports or limited frontline contact began to realize something terrifying. While a bolt-action rifle was precise, it was useless when a dozen Soviet soldiers charged your trench, each carrying a 71-round drum of high-velocity Tokarev ammunition. The Americans began to see photos of German elite units, SS paratroopers and Panzer grenadiers, discarding their own world-class MP-40s to pick up captured Soviet PPSH-41s. This was the ultimate insult to Western engineering. The enemy was begging to use the cheap Soviet gun. The mockery in the halls of Washington and London began to fade as the reality of the Eastern Front set in. The Americans were using the Thompson, a weapon that cost over $200 to make and required expert gunsmiths. Meanwhile, the Soviets were churning out Papashas for a fraction of the cost, and they were more reliable in the mud and snow. It was a clash of philosophies. The West built weapons for soldiers. The Soviets built a weapon for a massive, unstoppable tide. In this chapter of the war, the sewing machine was about to stitch the shroud of the Third Reich. But as the war progressed, the American fascination with this weapon turned from professional curiosity into a desperate desire to understand how something so simple could be so deadly. They were about to learn that in the chaos of a world at war, the most sophisticated weapon isn't the one with the best finish. It's the one that never stops screaming. The PPSH-41, or Papasha, as it was affectionately known by Soviet troops, wasn't just a simple gun. It was a testament to ingenious design under extreme duress. Its seemingly crude construction was, in fact, its greatest strength. Georgy Shpagin understood that mass production in wartime meant sacrificing intricate machining for speed and reliability. The weapon was primarily built from stamped sheet metal parts, reducing machining time by 75% compared to more conventional designs. Welding was kept to a minimum, and many components were riveted together. This meant that factories, some of which had been converted from sewing machine or car parts manufacturers, could churn out thousands of these submachine guns every single day. By the end of the war, over 6 million PPSH-41s would flood the battlefield, outnumbering every other submachine gun on all fronts combined. But the true heart of the PPSH-41's devastating effectiveness lay in its immense firepower. It was designed to accept two types of magazines: a 35-round curved box magazine, which was common in later stages of the war, and its iconic 71-round drum magazine. The drum magazine, a direct inspiration from the Finnish Suomi KP-31, was a game-changer. Imagine a single soldier holding a weapon that could unleash 71 rounds of 7.62 by 25 millimeters Tokarev ammunition at a blistering rate of over 900 rounds per minute. In the close quarters fighting of Stalingrad, or the dense forests and trenches, this was not just suppressive fire, it was a wall of lead. A squad of 10 Soviet soldiers, all armed with PPSH-41s, could collectively unleash over 700 rounds in under a minute, turning enemy positions into a hail of metal. This volume of fire was simply unmatched by anything the Germans, or even the Americans, had in standard infantry issue. The 7.62 by 25 millimeter Tokarev round itself was also a formidable cartridge. It was a high-velocity, pistol-caliber round, known for its excellent penetration at close to medium ranges. While not a rifle round, it was far more powerful than the 9mm Parabellum used by the German MP-40. This meant that the PPSH-41 could not only put down an incredible volume of fire, but also penetrate light body armor, wooden barricades, and even the steel helmets of German soldiers at closer distances. This combination of high rate of fire, large magazine capacity, and potent ammunition made it the ultimate weapon for Soviet storm groups during urban assaults. These units, often comprised of hardened veterans, would clear buildings floor by floor, relying on the overwhelming firepower of their Papashas to sweep away any resistance. The PPSH-41 also proved remarkably reliable in the harshest conditions. Its simple open-bolt design meant fewer moving parts that could jam. The large barrel shroud, with its distinctive cooling vents, helped dissipate heat during prolonged firing and also acted as a crude muzzle brake, reducing recoil. Soviet soldiers often used whatever lubricants they could find, from motor oil to kerosene, and the gun would still fire. In the unforgiving mud, snow, and ice of the Eastern Front, where other more finely engineered weapons struggled, the PPSH-41 continued to spit fire. Its robust construction could withstand being dropped, dragged through dirt, and exposed to extreme temperatures, making it a dependable companion for millions of Soviet soldiers. The initial American mockery gave way to an understanding of its brutal efficiency. While the U.S. focused on versatility and precision with weapons like the M1 Garand, the Soviets optimized for raw, unadulterated firepower in close quarters. And in the meat grinder of the Eastern Front, sheer firepower often trumped all other considerations. The PPSH-41 wasn't elegant, but it was effective, and its roar became the sound of the Red Army's unstoppable advance. This simple, mass-produced weapon became an icon of Soviet ingenuity and a terrifying symbol of the raw, industrial might that ultimately broke the back of the Wehrmacht. By 1944, the American military intelligence began receiving detailed reports from the front lines that shattered their initial skepticism. One of the most shocking revelations was how German soldiers, the very men the Americans were fighting, viewed the Soviet PPSH-41. It was common to see photographs of elite German Panzer Grenadiers and Waffen-SS units carrying captured Papashas instead of their own MP-40s. The Germans were so impressed by the weapon's 71-round capacity and its resistance to freezing that they didn't just use them as trophies, they officially integrated them into their arsenal. The Wehrmacht even went as far as creating conversion kits to chamber the PPSH-41 for German 9mm ammunition. This was the ultimate validation of the weapon's design. If the most technically advanced army in the world was abandoning its own equipment to use a crude Soviet rifle, the Americans knew they had underestimated a masterpiece. When American GIs finally got their hands on captured PPSH-41s after the invasion of Normandy or through exchanges with Soviet troops at the Elbe, the mockery was replaced by a sense of awe. U.S. soldiers, who were limited to the 8-round clips of the Garand or the 20-round sticks of the Thompson, were mesmerized by the sheer endurance of the Soviet drum. In tests, American armorers noted that while the Thompson was more accurate at distance, the PPS-H-41 was virtually impossible to jam. You could drag it through the mud of a trench, kick it into a snowbank, and it would still clear a room without a single hiccup. American soldiers began to beg for opportunities to test these weapons, realizing that in the chaos of a house-to-house clearing, the peasant's toy was the king of the battlefield. It was a humbling lesson in military philosophy. Sometimes reliability and volume are more precious than gold-plated engineering. The legacy of the PPS-H-41 didn't end with the fall of Berlin. After the war, the weapon became a global icon of revolution and resistance. From the frozen mountains of Korea to the humid jungles of Vietnam, the Papasha continued to scream. In Korea, American and UN troops faced the terrifying human wave attacks of Chinese and North Korean forces, many of whom were armed with the Type 50, a Chinese copy of the PPS-H-41. Once again, Western soldiers learned the hard way that a high rate of fire in the hands of a determined soldier was a force of nature. Even decades later, the silhouette of the drum-fed Soviet submachine gun remains one of the most recognizable symbols of the 20th century, representing the raw industrial power of a nation that refused to be conquered. Today, the PPS-H-41 is remembered not as a crude mistake, but as a stroke of genius. It proved that a weapon doesn't need to be pretty to be legendary. It proved that in the darkest hours of a world war, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. The Americans who once mocked the wooden stock in the stamped metal eventually saw it for what it truly was, the hammer that shattered the Third Reich. It remains a reminder that on the battlefield, the only thing that matters is the weapon that works when everything else fails. The burp gun may have started as a joke in the eyes of the West, but it ended the war as one of the most respected and feared instruments of death ever created. It was the weapon of the common soldier, built for the common man, and it won the greatest war in history.